freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
Welcome back, everyone, to Patriot Coalition Live. I'm Matthew Nugent.
And I'm Jason Mrochek.
Our goal is to bring you a timeless resource to teach about the U.S. Constitution and the proper role of government, the importance of America's Judeo-Christian heritage, and how to defend against threats to our republic. Folks, we want to engage members of our armed forces, veterans, first responders, and the patriots who support them in their noble professions. Weekly episodes are available Tuesday mornings or wherever you get your podcasts, like places like Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Also, you can get this podcast, these episodes, both video and audio versions at patriotcoalitionlive.com. Also, your support's important to us, both on a monthly basis and one-time gifts at patriotcoalitionlive.com/support. So y'all ready?
Absolutely.
All right. Okay, let's do this. Today we're picking up, this is going to be part 2 of 2, The Case for Liberty. What inspired America? So we're going to pick up right where we left off. Jason, back to you, brother.
Thanks, Matt. So if you remember in part 1, we talked about the broad aspects of where the concepts of liberty came from, and the fact that they weren't always, liberty's always been there, but we just simply embraced it over time to the point where we could actually articulate it and put it down in documents like the Declaration of Independence. So today, and we talked a little bit about the source for those ideas, how they were brought together in a couple different documents, a couple different books from pretty influential authors. The premier among them is John Locke. So today we're going to actually focus on John Locke's second treatise of government, or as it's commonly just referred to as the second treatise. And I'm going to kind of distill down the main points from where we draw these ideas about the God-given unalienable liberties that we enjoy. So let's get started. The primary, the way that John Locke opens his second treatise is talks about what we call the state of nature. And the state of nature, in short, is simply the state that man was in before we started forming civil governments. Okay, so it's just, he created us, here we were in, individuals, families, tribes, but actual no civil government that we would think of today. So that's what he refers to as the state of nature. So he begins his treatise with the premise that God created all men equal, and it is a kind of a self-evident truth. He describes that we were not subjugated or subordinated to anybody and any other man, and also no one was put in a sovereign position or put in dominion over anyone else. So in that sense, we were free to choose how we lived our life, but with one major exception. And that exception is that no one can disrupt the purpose that God gave us. He gave us life, he gave us liberty, and he gave us the ability to pursue property, to have property. So no one can disrupt that life, liberty, or property. And those things is what we call the law of nature, that you'll hear referred to in the Declaration of Independence as the laws of nature and of nature's God. So
Can I add
that
something
is,
to that?
yeah.
Yeah. So you guys have heard, this is America, I can do whatever I want, but that begs the question, well, can I really do whatever I want? If someone says, I can do whatever I want, and you can say, well, actually, you cannot disrupt the life, liberty, or property of another. So you can say, brother, you are disrupting my life, liberty, and property, so you need to cut it. So,
Right.
I mean, I joke, but this is very powerful. We have freedoms, but we have limits to those freedoms when it has to do with other people.
Yeah, no, it's definitely fundamental. And again, Locke's assertion was that God gave us those things, and it is
Hmm.
not up to man to take them away from us. So
There you
that
go.
again is the in a nutshell the law of nature, and so that's fundamental to what we're talking about. So let's actually kind of go through those things. Life and liberty obviously go hand in hand. I mentioned the quote from Thomas Jefferson in part one of this series, and that when God gave us life, He gave us liberty at the same time, and so
Hmm.
those life and liberty, they go very hand in hand. But if we specifically talk about life, the antithesis of that is murder, right?
Hmm.
And I mean the command to not murder was given to us, and it was written on our hearts, right? Even
Hmm.
before He gave us the Ten Commandments. If you think back to Cain and Abel, when Cain killed Abel, and
Hmm.
he was found out, if you will, by God, and He calls him out on it, and God
Yeah.
gives him his punishment that he is to be banished. If you remember Cain's
Mhm.
response, he was afraid because he knew that, without even telling anybody, he knew that other people who encountered him were going to know that he was a murderer and he was marked, right? So God imprinted that on our hearts even before He gave us the commandment. So again, this kind of goes to the concept that this is an innate, self-evident truth that we're dealing with. Okay, so let's talk about property. In the state of nature that John Locke describes, as I mentioned, none of us were given, or I should say, as John Locke mentions, none of us were given dominion over another. So that begs the question: with everything out there in the world, how is it that we can acquire things? Well,
Mhm.
Locke called this whole concept community in nature. So we were given the earth as community in nature. So having said that, he also gave
Mhm.
us the right to preservation. And again, we just talked about the premise that no one can take life, liberty, or property from us, but we have to sustain ourselves. So we have the right to preserve our lives with food and drink. Now, this is the most basic argument that you will hear for it, and that's why we use it. If I have the right to food and drink, I can go out
Mhm.
and collect water from a well. I can pull an apple from a tree. But if it's community in nature, how do I do that without infringing on somebody else's right? And that's kind of the first basic hurdle from a logic perspective that we come up with. And the answer to the question, how do I acquire property individually? It lies in the fact that if I'm going to sustain myself and I actually use my own labor
Mhm.
to derive some benefit from nature, for example, picking an apple or digging a well,
Mhm.
the fact that I join my labor with what is available to us in nature makes whatever I earn from that my individual property. Again, because
Mhm.
it helps me sustain my life. So that's
Mhm.
the basic premise for
Okay,
the
can I add something to that?
yep, for the concept of
Yeah.
property.
So given some more perspective of what Jason is talking about here, um, life, liberty, and property. Now, if I'm correct, Jason, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness refers to property. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what the
Oh,
founders called it, but it refers back to
yeah.
Locke's property.
I mean, back in Schoolhouse Rock days, when they said life for liberty and the pursuit of happiness, and they show a man in a cartoon form chasing a woman. So it's actually a mischaracterization. It doesn't mean chasing your fancy. It means your right to property. And now going back to the founding of our nation with King George III, King George would say, "I'll let you know what property you can own and when you can defend yourself." Okay, that is not freedom, that is tyranny. And the fact that so these concepts are new. Okay,
Mhm.
it was antithetical to what King George said because we were subjects, and the idea that all men are created equal is radical.
Yeah.
Okay, we mentioned that in the first part of this. um, and we talked about, and I joked a little bit, I'm in America, I can do whatever I want. But hey, you're disturbing my life, liberty, and property. Okay, the government, if we let it, will disturb. and disrupt our life, liberty, and property. Right now, it's November 23rd, 2020, and we're still going through what looks like another round of COVID shutdowns. I didn't say another round of COVID necessarily, because where I
That's a
live in
great
Florida,
distinction.
yes, because where I live in Florida, the great Governor DeSantis is saying, we're not going to shut down. Okay. There are different ways to address the COVID issue. Okay. Because there are governors who are, and there are leaders who are disrupting our life, liberty, and property of us. Okay. In fact, statistically speaking, uh, Charlie Kirk got the statistic for someone who's under 30 years old. Compare the risk of mortality from COVID and mortality from, getting killed in a car accident. The risk of someone getting killed in a car accident under the age of 30 is higher than the risk of someone dying from COVID. So why don't we use a little wisdom and judgment here and not shut down the country and, disrupt millions of people's life, liberty, and property? Okay. And there are other ways to do it. If someone's elderly, they've got a secondary condition which puts them at higher risk, let them be the ones to use their own discretion to address those risks. Don't disrupt our life, liberty, and property.
Yeah.
It's very unwise. It's very unwise. So, but anyway, Jason, you
Yeah.
want to add to that?
No, actually, I was going to go back to something you said earlier. You made that distinction between in our Declaration of Independence, it says life,
Mm-hmm.
liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, versus the more basic form of which is life, liberty, and property.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, and we'll talk about slavery here in a little bit. Just we'll add some context to this. But interestingly enough, that phrase "life, liberty, and or the pursuit of happiness."
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if they had put the pursuit of property in the Declaration of Independence, considering where the situation of slavery was at that day, when slaves were considered
Oh,
property. So rather than saying, "Hey, I have the right to pursue property," they said the pursuit of happiness.
interesting.
So, and again, we'll talk about slavery here in a second. But getting back to the concept of
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
property, we've kind of set the bar to look. If I'm going to preserve my health, I can pick an apple, I can dig a well, anything that I
Mm-hmm.
combine
Mm-hmm.
my labor with nature, I can call my own.
Mm-hmm.
That might beg the question, so what would stop me from picking every apple on every apple tree I can find,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and dropping stakes in the ground anywhere I wanted to dig wells? You can expand that analogy to whatever property you want, but the concept is the same. What stops me from hoarding things?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is that God has given us everything to use for our pleasure, right? And
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want anything to go to waste, right? If something goes to waste, if we have property going to waste, that means somebody else is not able to use that. So in terms of hoarding and why that's prohibited, as long as we are only using what we can ourselves and our family and our community can use, then it's not going to waste. So then we have to consider the concept of, what about if I can pick a bunch of apples, but I don't have any milk, or I need some leather, or whatever else it is. So if I need that to survive, I can pick enough apples where I can trade them to somebody else to get what I need. Again, this is a very basic example, but you can extrapolate it to today's principles. The idea of I can, if I need to, and it's not just something that I need to survive in and of itself, I can grab a barrel of apples, use it as a store of value, and trade it for something I do need. So in that sense, I can put a fence around an apple orchard and say, this is what I need to survive, because I need half of those to eat, and I need half of them to trade for something else I need to survive. Okay, so we get into this whole concept of, now I can enclose a piece of land so that this is what I reasonably need to
Mm-hmm.
survive,
Mm-hmm.
or my community or family needs to survive. So that's how we get to the idea of how we can then enclose property and use it for our own survival.
So it's interesting that you talk about the use of property. When we grow our business, for example, and you bless other people with it, you're multiplying its value, and you gain wealth versus you say hoarding in it, just store, you just leave it there. It doesn't necessarily gain value. That's kind of an interesting concept. It's really interesting.
Yeah, no, and to your point, gaining that wealth again, in John Locke's terms, that is a store of value that you can
Mm-hmm.
use to subsist and to benefit your community, your family, your descendants. Right? If your
Yep.
descendants also need some sort of means to support themselves,
Mm-hmm.
so this store of value can be used in many different senses. So that's the concept of property. So that takes us through what he says about life, what he says about property, to
Mm-hmm.
include tangible property as well as real property, meaning real estate or land. So then it kind of brings us to the question of, all right, so we have these laws of nature. I can't disrupt the life, liberty, or property of another.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt has set up his homestead with a fence around his orchard, and I can't go in and take his apples or take his water. Who's to stop me if I do? Right? Well,
Mm-hmm.
according to John Locke and what he writes, the idea that if we have a law and we don't enforce it, the law is in vain. So God would not give us this law if it were not to be enforced. Otherwise, it would be of no use. So when we're in the state of nature, again, meaning that we don't have any sort of civil government, it is up to Matt to defend and execute the law of nature. So
Mm-hmm.
if I come
Mm-hmm.
and take too many apples and suddenly his family can't eat, he's got to come and take them back from me. And if I won't give them, in order for him to preserve life that God has given him, he has to execute the law of nature, which means he may have to kill me, right? So if he kills me, or family member for taking too many apples, and my brother or cousin says, you know what, he didn't take too many, he took, you still could have survived. You made poor judgment, Matt. My cousin, my brother, they may come and kill you because you took my life. And then we get into a Hatfield and McCoy situation, right?
Yes.
Where
Mm-hmm.
it spirals out of control. So
Mm-hmm.
this whole idea that we have to execute the law of nature is one, it's an individual responsibility initially in
Mm-hmm.
the state of
Mm-hmm.
nature, but it's the first time that we are granted authority over another in the state of nature. And it's only limited by our own reason, our conscience, and in many regards, proportionality, right? I should only do to you what I need to in order to enforce the law of nature so that we both can enjoy the laws of nature.
Can I add something here?
Yeah.
If you guys pay close attention to the context of what we're saying, this has to do with individuality,
Hmm.
um, responsibility, and personal property. This is not socialism, communism, and this idea we're talking about here of individual liberty, of freedom, of property. It's in our DNA, and it as an American citizen, it's a treasure. But our country has gotten more and more away from that as we've gotten more socialistic, meaning I want free this, I want free that, I want, whenever you take something for free, actually nothing is free, guys, in this world. Someone had to pay a price for it, or someone will pay a price for it. So I avoid using that word free.
Yeah.
Okay, because I remember I was at this, it was a Coliseum, and I don't know what it was, and someone was selling me, for $10 you get a hot dog and a free bag of chips, and I'm like, I like 2 free bags of chips, and she's like, well, you got to pay first, so it's not free.
Yeah.
So people ask for free stuff. You're getting away from personal responsibility. Whenever you get something for free, you lose something of yourself.
And when you get it from the government first has to take that from somebody else in order to give it to you, which
That's
again
right.
is, you can get into the laws of it and the laws of nature, but that's the bottom line there.
Yeah.
So now we've encountered what the first sort of and the main problem with the state of nature is, and that is that our own biases, our own
Mm-hmm.
individual emotions and biases prevents us from judging accurately the how we are going to execute the
Mm-hmm.
laws of nature on somebody else, right? We talked about the Hatfields and McCoys. That can just blow out of proportion. And so
Mm-hmm.
those biases that we have, we're not really good judges in our own case. And so there's really no, in a state of nature, there's no authority on earth that we can appeal to, because again,
Mm-hmm.
we're all created equal. We in some sense, have to kill the aggressors to make sure that we can maintain our livelihood. This retribution can just spiral out of control.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting, in Locke's second treatise, he talks about, and this is when he brings in that civil society is the remedy to the state of nature. This whole biased judging of our own cases. If we take well, we'll get into it, but if we take a limited amount of our own freedoms and we give it to a government, we can remove ourselves from that situation where we're biased.
Okay, so John Locke here is a case for a system that government is to enforce the laws of nature, because as the population grows, people need more elbow room. It's once a certain threshold is met, people need a government, and he describes this as a civil society. So, Jason, can you talk about limited temporary government?
Yeah, well, and so we sort of talked about it, but at some point, right, we have enough people who are moving around in close proximity where we start to see these problems in the state of nature. As I said, the John Locke solution for the state of nature is to bring about a civil government. And so with a civil government, we can give up a limited and temporary amount of our own liberty in order to allow a government of our own choosing to decide the laws by which we're going to abide by, how we're going to determine who breaks those, and then what punishment we're going to mete out to those people. So what used to be our authority to do, as given by God, we are allowing through our own choice a government to do that. And so that is the first concept where John Locke talks about a civil society, where we're giving some of that limited and temporary authority to them. But notice, if and for millennia, well, centuries certainly, but millennia probably, the primary way that we set up civil society was through a monarchy. But if you think about it, remember the problem was that with state of nature was that one person had a bias and he might take that out on somebody else. But what is a monarchy? A monarchy is where one person has the ultimate authority and they still have bias. So how can a king act in judgment in something that where he is affected, maybe his wealth, his family, his land, what he considers his? So a monarchy does not solve the problem of the state of nature. And so remember, we talked about how these concepts started to swirl around and gain traction because Locke and Montesquieu and others were starting to talk about them. Well, this is about the same time that the founders started to think about these things. And they realized that absolute power, they have the right to take my life, my property, and in a sense, that puts them in a state of war with us. That's what John Locke calls a state of war. Because if you're putting yourself in a position where I can do anything to you that I want, that goes against the whole concept that God gave us, that we have the right to life, liberty, and property. So this has to be opposed, right? The state of war has to be opposed, which is where the founders found themselves because they started to see the fruits of this in this new paradigm of what John Locke talks about in the civil society. Well, we got the result of that was when we fought a war of independence with them. So this is, again, this kind of takes us up to the present. So now we've kind of incorporated everything that John Locke, in a nutshell, has said about where these ideas of liberty come from. And I promised that we would kind of mention slavery. The concept of slavery, with according to the law of nature, it says that we cannot take somebody's life, liberty, or property. Well, in the same sense, that applies to us too. We cannot take our own life, right? Otherwise, we are in ourselves violating what God has given to us. So if we don't have the authority to take our own life, we cannot give that to somebody else either, as we said. But in a slavery sense, it essentially allows the owner to kill his or her slave if they don't obey, right? So slavery under the laws of nature and nature's God are not allowed. So if
Okay.
there were slaves, basically resisting authority would lead ultimately to our death, because they could just kill us.
So Jason, if the founders were following John Locke and he said slavery is against the laws of nature, why did we have slavery at the founding of our nation? And I know a lot of you are asking that right now. And the reason why you're asking that is, one, we don't get this education in school anymore. If we do, it's short. College professors aren't taught this, and it's not given significance. And we've got a left-leaning media and a left-leaning type of education that's anti-American. So this is a really important topic, and Jason
Yeah. No,
gives a great description of it.
well, as it turns out, right, John Locke wrote the second treatise in
Mm-hmm.
1689. Now, at that point, slavery had existed for millennia, right? It
Mm-hmm.
was pervasive in the world, different forms of it, but it was an institution that had been around for a long time. So now, 1689 comes, John Locke writes the second treatise, well, he writes two treatises of government. And then shortly after that, the framers and the founding fathers came together and had to figure out how they were going to create a new nation, right? So from 1689, in an era where you couldn't just send a quick email or a text to somebody, say, hey, this slavery thing is not right? Haven't you read John Locke's
The
second
slavery
treatise?
blog, the abolition blog,
Yeah, so those things didn't exist. So it took a little bit of time for these I say theories, these ideas to permeate the population of the United States. So at that time, in we'll call it 1775, in the Declaration of Independence, and then 1789 when we started or 1787 when we started to create our Constitution, it wasn't like we could just flip a switch, right?
That's right.
At that time, the majority of the colonies had already realized that slavery was against the laws of nature as Locke had written, right? I mean, yes, it's sad that it took mankind that long to figure that out, but they figured it out, right? And so all but I think two colonies at the time, Georgia and South Carolina, were against slavery. Now, and for them, those slaves had been sometimes in the family for generations. So again, this wasn't something you could flip a switch. We eventually got it right, but you'll hear today that slavery happened because we allowed it and systemized it, right? What do they call it? Systemized slavery or
systemic
racism, right? Yeah. So in fact, it's the opposite, right? It was the switch that we flipped by the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution that helped overturn it.
So what Jason is saying here is that here's the big takeaway. When you study history, and you should, okay, it's important to understand the context of history. Already, one huge takeaway is that the idea of all men are created equal, that was radical, because it was a monarchy, there was tyranny, slavery for millennia. And Jason points out, it's very enlightening, that we said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, not property, because that would have given more power for slave owners to say they're my property, it's my right to it, which is not a truth. So understand this: the United States and England were the first, Western countries. I think the first countries really in modern history to illegalize slavery. Specifically, it was new slaves, and we had to eventually, we fought a conflict involving 900,000 casualties, 900,000 casualties, 600,000 of which were deaths within our own country. It's our Civil War in 1861, 1865. So do you know of any other country that has paid such a great price for freedom? Think about that, guys.
No.
So, I mean, so two ideas, and eventually in the early 1900s, women's suffrage were given the right to vote. It was a progression. Okay, so those two and three ideas, that all men are created equal, that slavery is against the laws of nature. It took a long time, and it took a great amount of blood in America. So understand that United States of America is one of the, that, and in England, we're very advanced in terms of, freedom and liberty. So remember that, guys, because people are going to tell you this malarkey that America is systemically racist. That is false. That's patently false. Now, there will always be people who are unscrupulous, who have, for some reason, compromised their morals, or who are amoral, okay, that are selfish, and people have their choice, which means they're going to make wrong decisions. We can't do much about that, but we can educate ourselves and recognize what is special about America, and this podcast specifically, this episode, is to address that.
Yeah. And one other thing I'll just throw out there is, you can go and read it, Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. You won't find it talking about slavery. You won't talk about it. You won't find it talking about color of somebody's skin or their race, right? They're not in there, and for good reason. So we've covered a lot. Hopefully we've at least summed up John Locke's thesis about what it is, these ideas of liberty and where they came from, and how they you can probably see now how they've inspired our Declaration of Independence. But I'm going to boil them down, because you'll see almost a direct translation into the opening of the Declaration of Independence. So they kind of boil down to several principles of liberty, as we call them. The first is this concept that all men are created equal, equality. So if you remember from, and I'm going to quote from the Declaration of Independence, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So
woohoo! I can't help it, man. I got to cheer. I love it. Whenever someone reads the Declaration of Independence,
man,
I love it.
These founders, they were just, they were brilliant. They were eloquent. They were just concise. Some people will probably say not, but I think so. So again, this concept of all men are created equal. We talk about that. Are their separate and equal station, that they all men are created equal. It's right there in the Declaration of Independence. So the second principle is the fact that we were given God-given unalienable rights. So here's where that comes into the Declaration of Independence, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It says it right there, God-given unalienable rights. So that's the second one. So we've got, all men are created equal. We've got God-given unalienable rights. The third one is the purpose of government. So this is the third principle of liberty in the Declaration of Independence, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So it tells us the whole purpose of government is that we can secure the rights that we just talked about, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That's right.
The fourth principle, the political sovereignty of the individual. So again, this is coming from the Declaration of Independence, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So the government derives their just powers from the consent of the governed. That means that they don't do anything that we don't allow them to do, because we are ultimately the sovereigns for our nation. And the last one is the right of self-determination. So number 5 is right of self-determination. So again, quoting from the Declaration, that
I love this. I love this. Go ahead, man.
That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security.
Awesome.
So that
Awesome.
ending part of that opening talks about our right of self-determination. We are only able, no one is able to put on us any form of government that we don't choose, and if we don't like it, we throw it off and we start anew.
Yeah, and you said it's our duty. And for those of you who are West Point Academy grads or know some, you know that word duty, honor, country. Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be. The word duty is do or die. Okay, so it says here. I just love it every time somebody reads that aloud. When I read it, it gets me all fired up in a good way. And so it's your duty. Okay, and I want to point out that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. The government exists for us.
That's right.
Not the other way around. Okay. And what we're learning recently in this recent long-going election process is that the states have a lot of power in the voting process because it's the states that gave the power to the federal government, not the other way. So that was incredible. So Jason, what have these principles given us?
Yeah, well, that is, I mean, one of the great things about America, really. It's man's nature to be free. I mean, set aside country, you know, ethnicity, whatever. Man's nature is to be free. And I love it. You know, you mentioned this phrase the other day, and I love it. It's hashtag American privilege, right?
That's right, baby.
We have the
American privilege. Woo!
of living in America, where we have self-determination and freedom. You know, we can have a family that's maybe safe and secure. These are the things that people are, regardless of what country they live in, these are just things that men pursue because we are, you know, mankind. To have a family, make sure that they're safe and secure, to provide for them, be able to change jobs when they want to, and to pursue the things that they're good at or passionate for.
That's right.
You find work whenever you want it, or wherever you want it. To start your own business, to be an entrepreneur, and to strike out on your own. To be able to support your family in whatever way. These aren't just American things. These are things that are mankind. It just happens to be in America where we have protected these things. The freedom to raise your family with kids, how you want to raise them, to make sure that they have your values and your principles. Live where you want to live. Exercise your religion the way you want to exercise it. Again, assuming that you're not infringing upon, you know, the laws of nature. And one of the greatest ones, you know, I like this, you know, freedom to the right to bear arms also, but the right to free speech. When you have to tell a government that they are now pursuing ends that are destructive to you, your family, your loved ones, the right to be able to say what you want and to tell them and your fellow man, this is wrong and we're not going to stand for it. That's critical. Otherwise, how do you elicit the support of other people? How do you articulate and continue to articulate these principles of liberty and the inalienable rights if you don't have the speech available to do that? So it's a very, very important thing. So all these things really help this is what those principles of liberty allow us to have, all these things in one nation.
That's right. American privilege, baby.
That's right.
Now, you guys, you don't really understand American privilege unless you draw a contrast. If you don't travel much, you should, not just from state to state, which is great, but travel outside of the country. I've been to the Soviet Union, I've been to Russia, I've been to Germany, I've been, you know, I've been to Japan, I've been to Australia, New Zealand, and China. Let me tell you something, man. I'll preface it with American privilege versus communist tyranny. Okay, Jason just gave a beautiful description of a few of the elements of American privilege. Okay, this is all Americans, and for those of you who are listening to this who are not American citizens, there's a pathway to become an American citizens. I think it is one of the most precious things in the world to be an American citizen. Absolutely, hands down. Now, for those of you who want the freedoms of America, some of you, might be living in a communist country. In fact, some of the greatest citizens in America have come from communist country and love our freedoms and prosper because they realize what they have. So notice we didn't say a color, an ethnicity to enjoy American privilege. Okay. Now I'm going to draw a little comparison or a stark comparison here, and this is from my own personal experience. I'll use China as an example. Okay. For many years, China had a one-child policy, okay, which is basically husband and wife get together, they have one child. That was it. That was recently changed about a year and a half, 2 years ago, to where you could have two children. And if you violate that, you can't get a driver's license, you can't work for the government. And in China, the Chinese Communist Party, guess who does most of the hiring? You guessed it, the government. And you ostracized. You can't get medical care. So think about that. That's pretty powerful. So with those who want, government, single payer healthcare, don't do it, folks. Do not do it. When you pay with your own Benjamins, those dead inventors, you have choice. Okay. Now, there's also in China selective abortion. Girls are aborted at a much higher rate in China than any other. It's unfortunate that it goes on because males are the breadwinners in that society. Also, anybody can vote in China. Anybody can vote if you're of age, if you're a Chinese citizen. But how many people are on the ballot for each position? One, just one. And the government picks who that is. That's right. And they usually pick someone popular, an athlete like Yao. I think he actually ran for Chinese office, or the government selected him, volunteered, something like that. But don't quote me on that. But they get people like Yao. If you follow the NBA, he's like 8 feet tall and he played basketball. You can't start a business when you want, and there's only one place pretty much in China where they have industrialization that's kind of free enterprise. Funny thing is, it worked when they allowed free enterprise, but they don't call it free enterprise. They call it Chinese economics. So China is a surveillance state. All their cameras everywhere. I think in this year alone, 2020, China added 300 million new cameras. I'll say they added 300 million new cameras. Seriously. You don't have free access to the internet. Sounds like what the United States is going to in big tech. Not interested, folks. People who go against the Chinese Communist Party often, quote unquote, disappear. It happens. You are told where to live and where you can work. Here's something, okay, parents, be careful. I'm going to say this here. It's a little bit, so be ready. Criminals have been used for the Chinese medical tourism industry. Dramatic pause to get ready. Organs are removed from prisoners without their permission. Eyes, kidney, heart, lungs. Sometimes, when they're not sedated and while they're awake. It's barbaric. It's absolutely barbaric. That is pretty easy to find on the internet. China says they are working on that, but they've got a group of their society, the Chinese Uyghur Muslims. At least 1 million are in work camps, and they were targeted actually and being used and slaughtered. Slaughtered, I think, is a good word for it. And their organs were being sold on the medical tourism industry. The government takes much of your money, okay? And religious people, Christians and Muslims, for example, both religions are targeted by the Chinese Communist Party. So you like equal opportunity in America or equal opportunity oppressors in China? One of my professors in college, he would say, Stalin was an equal opportunity oppressor. It's a characteristic of communism. Okay, yeah. They do most of their killing on their own people. It's a fact. So the final question is, if you were to participate in making your own country, what would you like? A communist country or a representative republic, which, well, a representative democracy, which is a republic? So understand that America incorporates God-given unalienable rights, and our commitment is demonstrated in the incorporation of these unalienable rights in our Declaration of Independence and in our Constitution. So,
Yeah,
Jason?
Matt, that's a great way to summarize it. Um, y- we have to consider that the fact that we have the privilege of living in America. I mean,
It's a
we've kind of
privilege.
demonstrated, or we've walked through in this two-part episode, the what a privilege that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have
Mm-hmm.
to respect that. We have to be able to make sure that we can pass that on to future generations. They have to have
Mm-hmm.
an understanding
Mm-hmm.
of what our country was founded upon, why the Declaration of Independence says what it is, what principles were
Mm-hmm.
in it. Um, there's a whole lot of learning that our kids have to, not just kids, right? Kids,
Mm-hmm.
adults, and everything we have to go through in order to understand these things. So
Mm-hmm.
what we've tried to do in this two-part episode is give you an idea of where the ideas of America came from. What
Mm-hmm.
inspired this idea of freedom. And so we talked about some of the important philosophers like Locke and Montesquieu. We've delved into one of the most influential works, which was Locke's Second Treatise of Government, to talk about
Mm-hmm.
the state of nature, the laws of nature,
Mm-hmm.
how the life, liberty, and the pursuit of property are what comprise the law of nature. We've also talked about how those were transformed into
Mm-hmm.
the Declaration of Independence and
Mm-hmm.
kind of memorialized in those principles of liberty. And we we didn't mince words, or I say we. Yeah, I'm proud to be an American, but our founding fathers, they didn't mince words about what it meant to be free and those principles that
Mm-hmm.
that we had to defend at all costs. And thankfully, and we'll talk about this in future episodes, they took those principles of liberty and then they codified it. They made it into law so that that was the ultimate of our country. The purpose of government is to defend those liberties. It's not to provide, it's not to solve problems. It is to defend
Mm-hmm.
that liberty, and that's what the founding fathers did. So, hopefully you've picked up some things from these two episodes about where the ideas of liberty came from and why it's different from other places in the world. And certainly,
Mm-hmm.
as Matt pointed out, in that great contrast with countries who promote and subscribe to communism. So, with that kind of ends the instructive part of these two episodes. So I really appreciate you guys listening in.
Yeah, that was amazing, Jason. Appreciate it, buddy. We need more of this in our public schools, folks. American privilege, baby. So thank you, folks, for listening and for your support. Go to patriotcoalitionlive.com. That's patriotcoalitionlive.com. Thank you for your monthly support and for your one-time gifts. If you'd like to support us, we appreciate it. Please go to patriotcoalitionlive.com/support. Please give us a 5-star rating. You can find this in audio and video version at patriotcoalitionlive.com. And you can find it on major podcast platforms such as Apple Podcast, as well as Spotify. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you here next time.
See you next time, guys. Thanks.